All right, should we start? Okay, the tech guy is waving that we should start. Okay. um, okay, a few more people coming in here. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to discuss accessibility with us this morning. So I'm Kivmars Bowling, or Q for short, and I'm the Publications Director at SIAM, which is the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics in Philadelphia in the US. And I'm joined by Dr. Shih, who is the Director of Integrated Library Systems at the University of Southern California. And this morning we're going to talk about how both publishers and librarians are trying to deal with the new accessibility mandates in Europe and the US. And we're going to talk, I'll talk a little bit about how we've come together with the other math societies. Wynne will talk about how they're trying to work across campus to meet the guidelines. And then we're going to try and leave some time at the end. We'll keep an eye on the times in case you have questions or we want to have a discussion and see where we go with it. So if this works, which hopefully it does. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to talk a little about the EAA, and then I'll hand over to Wynne, who's going to talk about the ADA. So the first mandate that has come up very recently is the European Accessibility Act. Now, this came into force in June of last year, and this primarily focuses on books, actually, on e-books. And essentially, going forward, all publishers need to have, for their new books, their front list, they have to have an accessible version of that book available if you're selling it or making it available in the European Union. Now, there's some debate amongst publishers, but we seem to have come to the consensus of how to interpret the law. It's not written actually very clearly, but we're working on the assumption that we have 5 years to make all of our backlist titles accessible. Now, that is a non-trivial task. If you imagine all the books you've ever published and having to go into every figure, making that accessible, and also sometimes the authors have passed away or they've moved on to other projects. So it's potentially a project that you could spend a lot of time and cost on. So many publishers are trying to work out, okay, what is the sweet spot? What is the reasonable amount of time and resources to make that backlist accessible, and what is legally required as well, of course. So there is a clause in the EAA that talks about disproportionate burden. So if you can show it's going to cost you too much time or too much money, that you may be able to say we have an exception, but it's unclear what disproportionate burden is really going to mean. That's not actually been defined in the law. And then finally, when I've discussed this with other publishers, and hopefully the publishers in the room can share when we have the Q&A, we may handle some of the backlist titles on an on-demand basis. So for SIAM, I think we'll probably focus on our best-selling backlist titles. And then beyond that, if somebody has a request, they can contact us and say, you know what, I need an accessible version of this particular book, and we'll then work to make that available to them. So we're trying to interpret this and find the right balance between being as accessible as possible, but also within the limitations of all of our resources at our publishing houses. So that's the EAA, and then I'm going to hand over to Wynne, who's going to talk about the ADA.
I'm glad that you mentioned about how you handle the backlist, because library also digitized so many different contents in the last at least 20 years, and we also have a very old content that's not archived content or that's not really compliant. And we are doing the same approach like you, that focus on the heavily used, the most critical contents like learning, contents in our learning management system, to do that first before going to the other content. But anyway, so in the United States, there are two federal laws that specifically that related to disability or impact the accessibility requirements. The first one, I'm sure most of you know, the ADA, the American with Disability Act, particular Title II section that stipulate that discrimination we should not discriminate users with disability when they access any our content or any service we provide. This is not only limited to public accommodation, but also any place that offers service, including library, museum, and private educational institution also follow this rule. And the latest updates issued in April 2024. They include digital content. The original doesn't have any digital components, but the 2024 new release or new rules that include digital accessibility of web content as well as mobile device applications. And it gives any party that's affected by this policy or rules 2 years to become compliant. So now we are facing the deadline this April. Many of us are trying to get as much as we can do at this before the rule become active. So another important federal policy is the Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, which also prohibit discrimination of access to federally funded program and employment. Yeah, just go to the next one. So now we know this policy or regulation that set up the foundation for us to follow. But then, what are these enforcement? What kind of standard or details that we have to comply? So all this EAA and all ADA, they all use industrial international standard. It's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which was issued or it's maintained by the W3C World Wide Web Consortium, that they constantly update this standard based on the change of technology. So the one stipulated in the ADA and EAA is the 2.1 version, but the latest one is the 2.2 version that was released 2023. 2.1 is back 2018 that was released. So 2.2 has more recent changes. And I think that many publisher and library are also trying to use the newer standard so that they can meet the latest requirement, and also for the backlist, like Q mentioned, to go back converting them to the newest standard. And then so now these standards, there's a fundamental principle that guided this standard. That's what we call the pool principle, which means that any digital service and products that need to provide, allow users to perceive the content. So, your content need to be like color contrast or font size, need to allow any user to be able to perceive them, operate the content. So if you use different way, keyboard or some other way to access content, it should work with those devices. And understandable, the content need to be understandable to any users. Use plain language, for example, and then the technology they use, you need to robust enough to support the technology they use, no matter what assistive technology they use to access your website or application, or the other browser, different browser they use, need to work well with your content.
Okay, thank you, Win. So now we're going to spend. How are we doing on time? Okay, so I think if we'll do 10 minutes on the accessible mathematics guidelines, and then I'll hand back to Win for a case study about USC. So accessibility for mathematics, as you can imagine, is a little bit tricky, because displaying mathematics is hard already, and then making it accessible is even harder. So when we were dealing with this, we realised that all of the Math Society publishers were probably trying to deal with the same issues. So I brought together three other math societies, so the American Mathematical Society, AMS, European, EMS, and London Mathematical Society. And our goals there were to come up together with some author guidelines for preparing accessible mathematics content. And our goals there were really to try and change the culture among our authors so that when they're writing their content to start with, they're already thinking about accessibility. So you can go back afterwards and correct things and remediate and make things better, but it's much better if the author, as they're writing, they're already thinking, is my content accessible? Because you avoid lots of problems later. So that was one of our goals. The other goal was to make sure that we were asking our authors to do the same things. We weren't asking them different things and confusing them. And also, as math societies, we obviously were very well positioned to talk specifically about how mathematics and accessibility work together. And by the way, this QR code goes to the guidelines themselves, which we published earlier this month. And we certainly welcome feedback on them, because I'm sure we'll adjust them as we go. So I'm not going to go through everything in the guidelines, but I want to give you a little flavour of the kind of things we discussed and we tried to cover in them. We looked at colour contrast and selection, thinking carefully about when you use colour and how you use colour when you're creating your figures. We talked a lot and discussed a lot alt text, which I've got a slide on. And the guidelines also include a number of examples of different kinds of charts and how to write alt text for them, and kind of a before and after to really help authors, orient themselves. So one of the key principles is never rely on colour alone. So when you're making a figure, if you made that figure black and white, would the reader actually understand what the message of that figure is, or that chart? So trying to think in that vein. Now you can still use colour, but in this before and after, so this is the original version, this is the accessible revised version, it still has some colour, but you've added some lines, some shading, some patterns. And so if you make that black and white, it means somebody who is visually impaired can then understand what is going on. Check the colour contrast, so how do colours against each other on the screen display, and there's a certain ratio you need to aim for to make them accessible, so 3:1 for key graphical elements and 4.5:1 for text on the page. And there's an online colour contrast checker which authors can use to check that. Now alt text. Okay, so we had many discussions about alt text, and there are many different opinions and approaches to alt text. Where we settled on was to ask our authors to write a short alt text, ideally 1 to 2 sentences, that really summarises the key points of that figure. Now, if you have a complex figure, you could spend 5 paragraphs describing every single thing on that chart, right? But really what the reader wants to know is what do I need to understand from this figure? What is the key takeaway? And then we also asked them to include a reference to somewhere in the text or in the caption where the reader can find further information about that figure. And if you don't have somewhere in the text where you've explained that figure, then the question you have to ask yourself is why? Well, why is the figure in there? And so, again, it goes back to trying to help authors think about accessibility early on when they're writing. Have you explained in the text why this figure is important? Other good principles like writing out the symbols and abbreviations to make sure that the screen readers can actually read them out. So this is a very brief example. So here we have a very lovely, I'm not a mathematician, I don't know if any of you are, but so I'm a good fake mathematician. I can talk to mathematicians, but here is a lovely mathematical function graph. And here at the bottom you can see the short alt text. So it's kind of a one-line kind of description of what the graph is showing. And then as you can see, we say for further information, see the caption and a specific paragraph where you can find out more information about that chart. So that's kind of the format we've asked our authors to do. And as I said, in the guidelines, we have examples for a number of different kinds of charts. There are many graphs and flowcharts, etc., to help them. For equations, the math publishers, it varies a little bit, but essentially the authors don't have to do anything. We're going to use either their LaTeX code, or some publishers will convert it into the MathJax kind of ClearSpeak, I think it's called, or PlainSpeak, so that it can be read out by the screen reader. So authors don't have to do anything, but we do tell them that's how we're going to handle their equations. Yeah, so I will pause there. So that gives you a flavor. I know we all loved maths at school, so hopefully that will give you all the maths you want for now. And I'll hand over to Win for a USC case study.
So I'm going to present the journey that we went through because of some issues that we were identified by the Office of the OCR, Office of Civil Rights. So just give you a quick overview. USC is a large academic institution in the United States. You see the student and the number of staff members, and we have a lot international student. Usually it's ranked number 1 or 2. In terms of library, we are also a kind of large academic library, and in our strategic or mission statement, we also mention accessibility to all the service and information we provide is also critical. That's part of our service. And then, so in December 2023, the university received a notification from the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights that indicate that they have identified 3 barriers in the USC, our digital environment that prevent user to access our service or online program or any content that we provide, that they could not completely participate in those program and service. So Q already mentioned keyboard navigation issue and color contrast, and then also the last one is also the keyboard related where you are on the website, the location issue. So we reached agreement with the Office of Civil Rights that this just give you a detail how much requirement they ask you to do. So we have 6 action items that with more detailed description of what we need to do, and also they also set a deadline for us to fix those problems, and also ongoing practice. So this is what the university had in that time that we have to do within the time frame that we have to get this issue resolved. So of course the top administration leadership that jump into action, they start from the top-down kind of approach. They form a campus-wide committee, that task force that oversee this project, and individual units on campus need to have a accessibility coordinator that will report back to the top level. And we also hire a director of digital accessibility, and then she also have 2 additional staff members that work support her, and her major role is focused on coordinating and leading the digital accessibility strategic plan implementation and training, and also compliance. So that's her main role, that we create a position. And then we'll update the policy, adopt officially the WCAG 2.1 as the technology standard that we have to follow. And we also update our procurement process. The vendor has to fill out a survey to make sure their product and service meet the WCAG 2.1 standard. If they don't, they have to explain why. And also, every unit has to start first inventory your website, and then testing, make sure, identify issue that based on the WCAG standard, identify which parts of that standard that you didn't meet, and then develop a plan to get that issue resolved. And those are, we use a template that has to submit to the top level, so they keep on monitoring the progress. And this kind of testing is done on a quarterly basis. They also have a campus-wide software scan all the website, and that produce report that if that's your website, you know, they let you know that you didn't meet this, or you received also quarterly report that you have to fix those issues. And then also they provide, develop training, online training for everyone who are involved to gain the skill and knowledge about testing. Also, as part of the unit at the university, in the university, we also did our audit our website and also follow the policy and requirement, do quarterly. We divide the work, right? It's not everyone know every system, every website. So the whole thing is kind of divided across folks in the library. And then we also, we have a large digital library with over 350,000 files or digital objects. And so we also looking into that and starting with audio, video, legacy audio and video files that we are in the process of creating captions and transcribed for those about 14,000 audio digital files to get them meet the standards. And then we have some website that's, if it didn't meet, we can migrate to the university application itself, maintaining that our own. Working with vendors is one critical, and also we update our accessibility statement page, and also provide kind of guide for any user who has accessibility issue, that provide a list of service they can, or contact they can use through the library service point. Working with vendor is also an area we focus on. So now we ask for this VPAT. What's the full name of VPAT? Yes.
Go, sorry. Yes, voluntary product accessibility template. Sorry.
So it's a report, accessibility report that vendor need to, or gradually providing for customers using the WCAG standard and indicate, you know, if this standard 1, 2, 3, if they meet the standard or partially met. So we are asking vendor to provide that gradually if they have that kind of report. And we also kind of using the Aspire list, which is a list that verify, because some vendor now, I don't know if SIAM has a accessibility statement page or hub that, yes, explain your policy and your practice, but sometimes you don't know if they actually meet their policy, how transparent it is. So Aspire is a list that verify what vendor says and then see if they meet that kind of statement or they promise they should do. So that's a list that it's good to double check as well. And then procurement, because the campus-wide requirement that, as I mentioned earlier, any new vendor, I don't think we go back to the existing vendor. They have to fill out a survey, and the accessibility, actually list here the VPAT. They have to send us this report if they have, and the report need to be most recent 12 months because things change so quick. Older report just not reliable. So that's what that we do now with the vendor. Lesson learned, I think it's a good learning journey for us that we are lucky or fortunate or unfortunate that we have to deal with this earlier than other institutions because of the citation from the OCR. So we even though we get the automatic software scanning report, but we realize it's only 60 to 70% identify the problem. There are still problems that you really have to do manual testing. For example, if your content is behind a password page, the software won't be able to go beyond that page to do testing. And some of the testing result is not always reliable, so we still have to manually go through the reports. And then, of course, this become part of our, those who has to do the testing, part of their responsibility and workflows. And also vendor, depends on the vendor. Some are not very quick and responsive. Some put their the user interface behind. They don't allow us to touch their interface, so we have to rely on them, how quick they can get a fix. They don't have a sandbox that you can, if you have access, you can try fix it yourself on the sandbox that won't impact the production system. So depends on the vendor, the infrastructure they set up. Staff, of course, there's also a learning process. Not everyone fully embrace this because if they don't have to do this, their work doesn't directly involve, then they don't see that's something they need to know or learn about the accessibility side of the work. And also develop a plan B, which we call the equal effective alternative access plan. So the vendor, if they cannot meet certain accessibility standard, you need to have a plan that offer alternative way for user to access the content. And that's what this documentation is. So we need to document and also work with vendor, ask them, when are you going to fix it? So that's more documentation that you keep track of the issue, not just identifying them, but also monitor the progress. And then just continue to ask them for the latest VPAT reports.
All right, so just a couple of slides before we open it up for Q&A. So we just wanted to put this slide in here. So in the mathematics author guidelines, we do have a page at the end that has a list of further resources. Now, some of it's specific to mathematics, but most of it isn't actually. So if you are working in other subject areas, definitely have a look at that. Hopefully it will be useful. And then I actually forgot to ask at the start of the session, but could we have it by a show of hands? I was just curious. So who's a librarian in the room? Okay, great. And who is a publisher or a vendor or works with publishers? Yeah. Okay, so we've got a great mix actually. Every time I've given this presentation at various conferences, we always have a call to action, which is to please share the guidelines amongst faculty, students, librarians and publishers. That's the link, that's the QR code. We definitely welcome any feedback. We have publications accessibility at siam.org is the address. We will then share that with the working group amongst the math societies. I'm sure we will have to, refine the guidelines as they get real world use, and also we haven't actually we're going to put a CC license on the guidelines themselves. That's not actually on there at the moment, but we do want people to, feel free to reuse them. Just please attribute back to where the content came from, but we do want people to integrate them into their guidelines if you agree with the principles and if you think it's going to be useful for your authors. So I think the last thing really which we put at the bottom is to really try and create an accessible first or a born accessible culture, that people start to think of this much earlier. It just becomes part of doing business, how we run our professional lives, and then we don't have to go back and fix a bunch of content as Win was talking about there, and running all kinds of tests, and et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I think we have like 10, 15 minutes. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, or we certainly would be interested to hear if anyone wants to share their experiences of how they're dealing with these things in your context. Yeah. All right. We got a first person. Great. I'll give you the mic.
Thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing as a publisher. I think it's important. I'm glad you're doing it. But my question is for you. So you mentioned the digital accessibility position at the campus-wide level. Was there any positions or funds in the libraries that were dedicated to this work, or was it just absorbed by the existing workforce, is my question. So.
Really good question. As you, or some of you know, in U.S. Higher education is experience many financial challenges. So we, since last spring, spring 2025, there's a hiring freeze. So we really don't have any capacity to hire someone, but we do have a accessibility committee that kind of coordinate across different functional units to provide that kind of support. And also I forgot to mention, we have a dedicated library that has the longest open hours that we create accessibility or assistive technologies room that we work closely with the Office of Student Accessibility to provide service that it come with equipment that helps students if they want to transfer, convert content into different format. That's the lab they can go, or if there's some software we don't have, we refer them to the Office of Student Accessibility that they might have way to get the work for them converted. And we also, our interlibrary loan and document delivery service also doing some kind of, if it's a print material that's not digitized, they will digitize for the student who has that needs and send that to them. So they just need to request. So some of this kind of thing, we try to accommodate different needs of our students.
Any more questions? Okay, over here.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Peter. I'm been in publishing for many years, and over the years, the challenge has been getting authors as much as possible to prepare accessible manuscripts as they're developing them. And I had an incident recently with an author who had really, really complicated, like full-page flowcharts. And I looked at the flowchart information in the SIAM guidelines, and it makes sense, but this flowchart was so complicated, and it was trying to accomplish something that the text doesn't explain, because sometimes illustrations are meant to explain what you can't explain in the text. And the author submitted a 2.5-page description of the flowchart, which basically was repeating what was already said in the flowchart. And I couldn't figure out, I just despaired of ever at that flowchart being useful for somebody who cannot see it. And I don't know what your thought is on that.
Yeah, and which publisher are you, where do you?
I was at a library publisher at Virginia Tech at the time.
Right, I see. Yeah, so as we said in the presentation, we focused on the short alt text, but there is also a long description field which we debated long and hard about how much to use that. And with the complex figures, you can, as long as you link clearly to that 2.5-page explanation, making it available brings up my mind production issues. It gets very manual and how you're going to integrate it. But to your point about the quality of what authors are able or are willing to provide. We're hoping with these guidelines that authors will be able to do this and they'll have time and they'll want to do it. But we may find in 6 months or a year's time, actually, we're not getting good quality alt text. And I know some other publishers really from the start are actually just even using AI to create some alt text, and then they show that AI generated alt text with some human review. Then that goes to the author, and the author just kind of reads it and approves it. And by doing that, they kind of limit the the play area where how long and expansive you can get. So we're definitely going to have to evaluate the quality of what we're getting back. Is it actually useful? Because as I'm sure everyone in this room has probably worked in some capacity and accessibility now. It's kind of a special skill in writing alt text, for example. So even though the person understands the content, they may actually not always be the best person to write the accessible version of it. But we hope they are, because they do know the content, and it's very complex content, and certainly they understand it better than us as the publisher sometimes. So yeah, work in progress, I think, on that. Any other questions? Yeah.
So we have a lot of faculty that are having to remediate handouts to make the handouts accessible. And most of them are in PDF formats. And so we've had a lot of questions come up. And I know in your case, you're able to use, for the mathematical equations, the LaTeX code. But if it's a PDF and you're having to input the alt text for the equation, is there any recommendations or guidelines that you would point someone to for that?
So that's a great question, and so we didn't include specific guidelines on that in the published guidelines. But what we found when we discussed with the other society of publishers is we're all doing it slightly different ways. So SIAM, for example, we are actually our ebooks up to now have only been published in PDF format. We don't have an EPUB version. We may change that soon. So we're going to be publishing accessible PDFs, which is kind of a annoying, clunky way to do it, but you can get there and have the tagging, and it's kind of work heavy from the production side, but you can get there. We probably will try and move to EPUB, and other publishers do have EPUB, and that's a little more straightforward as far as I understand it. So we don't have published guidelines on that, but certainly we can connect afterwards, and if there's some best practice we can offer or whatever. But yeah, PDFs, I mean, I'm sure we've all gone to conferences for many years where people say the PDF is dead, we're going to move beyond the PDF, and I must have seen that presentation 4 or 5 times in my career, and in my head I'm always like, the PDF is not dead. Like, people love the PDF, they like to take it away, and it's a stable format, and they have the article or whatever the piece of content is. And so yes, we need all the other formats, but PDF is going to be around for a long time, so we have to have a plan for that file format, clearly. I don't know if you want to add anything on the handouts aspect and
that's a good question. So faculty is always difficult to reach. So our provost just sent out an email, encourage them to look into this issue. And our Center for Teaching Excellence, they also provide training. Of course, you cannot catch everyone, every faculty. I think that's just also our learning management system purchase a component that can add on to identify the contents that doesn't meet accessibility standard and offer some kind of remediation. So faculty might get a warning saying this page doesn't meet that standard. So that's some of approach we are doing right now.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, maybe we'll do a little plug. We were discussing before, and there's actually another session on accessibility tomorrow, which we were happy to plug. Do you want to say a little bit about your session?
Okay, hello. Yeah. Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm from the University of Florida, along with Daniela, Brittany, and Lisa. We'll be talking tomorrow at 11:45, question mark. About accessibility and how we are addressing web accessibility at UF, along with colleagues from the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So we'll kind of be comparing and contrasting our approach to their approach, and discussing like what we've learned in that and how we're approaching the upcoming WCAG standards. So how we're handling that? Yeah. Okay.
11:45.
Yes, 11:45.
Great. And Win just had one last comment he wanted to share as well.
Yes, I just want to talk about based on our experience. So everyone throughout our lifetime or their lifetime, you can temporarily or permanently have some disability experience. For example, we travel to here, we don't speak their language, we don't read, So that puts you in that environment that you can experience that people with accessibility to access information, there's barriers there. Also, I think it's a good investment business sense at the institutional level that you make your program, what service available for everyone. That's a good investment, and you reduce the liability, legal, risk being sued or any of those. So it's a good business decision that you make to focus and invest in this area.
And the last comment I'll add on that as well is, when we were trying to develop our guidelines, we tried to identify and contact, high-level mathematicians who also were visually impaired or blind, and it was hard to find them because it's a small group, right? We're trying to serve a small group of people, but there's also a chicken and egg aspect to it. There may be people who would have been in our field and would have been participating in the research culture, but they've been unable to get through the resources, and so they've been kind of shut out earlier in their career. And so that's what we're all trying to do, right, is to make sure that all the voices can participate, and also that all the talent can participate, because we may be missing key ideas or key contributions because they can't actually just read the content and then be able to engage with it. So hopefully if we all do a good job, that's where we'll get to, and we'll have an improved kind of culture on that front. So Win and I will be around for a few minutes if anyone wants to chat, and we'll be at the conference. Feel free to reach out, and thank you all for coming.